Hello, good afternoon if you're in Britain or Europe. Good morning if you're in the Americas. Welcome to everyone who's watching from Argentina in particular. My name's Jeremy Brown. I'm the Chief Executive of Canning House. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Canning House is the premium forum here in London for promoting relations between Britain and Latin America, and Iberia as well, but particularly Britain and Latin America. Obviously, Argentina, very important Latin American country, one of the three G20 countries in Latin America, second biggest economy in South America, uh, significant population, important history as a country. So there are all sorts of reasons why we look closely at Argentina, seek to understand Argentina better, and why there is demand here in Britain to understand what is happening in Argentina. So we held an event prior to the first round of voting, a live in-person event in London, where one of the issues under discussion was who would make the runoff. And there wasn't even a consensus on which two people would go into the runoff. And now we thought, rather than more speculation, we'd hold a sort of post-match analysis event, if you like, and look at both what happened on Sunday and what we think might happen. Now we know the outcome and we have a new president-elect. Final thing I'd say, this is, it seems to me, an earthquake politically. I mean, it's easy, every election. I mean, I used to be a politician. I used to be an elected politician in Britain, and people say that elections quite often come down to, do you want continuity or do you want change? And I suppose this election was a classic continuity versus change contest. But wow, I mean, normally the gap between the continuity and the change is not this dramatic and this stark. I mean, this is a spectacular level of change that has been put in front of the electorate. And also, quite often, you get people elected to high office who conceal their agenda quite a lot. And you're not, there's a degree of ambivalence about what they stand for. They're deliberately trying to fudge things to make sure that interest groups are not put off their candidacy. I think we can say, without being too controversial, that that is not what happened with the winning candidate in this election. He did not go around, as they say in English, treading on eggshells and trying not to offend anybody. So, there is a clear winner, a bigger margin than many people anticipated on Sunday between the winner and the runner-up, and a clear mandate, or at least a clear sense that there is a vote for dramatic change. How that translates into policy outcomes, I think, is one of the interesting questions for us to explore. So welcome everybody who's watching this discussion. We've got four eminent panelists to give you a different sort of take, each one on what has happened in Argentina and what might happen. I'll introduce them as they speak. They're each going to speak for around 8 minutes, 10 minutes max. The whole broadcast, if you like, is an hour and a quarter. So once we wrapped up, we should have about half an hour or so for discussion, the points coming out of what they've said and any other points we can pick up. So let's get going. Our first speaker is Dr. Jill Hedges. Welcome, Jill. Jill is the Deputy Director of the Analysis Team and a Senior Analyst for Latin America at Analytica. And importantly, she is an Associate Fellow of Canning House. So she is in some ways part of our home team, but she has expertise and authority in this area. And we thought she'd be an ideal person to get us started. So Jill, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. And I agree with you. This is the biggest political earthquake in Argentina since the 1940s. I think it's really a shift away from the status quo and into the unknown. I think it's fair to say that we've had warnings. It's been a long time coming, really. I think both the elections in 2015 and 2019 were basically anti-incumbent votes. 2015, Mauricio Macri won very narrowly, basically because people were very tired of Cristina Kirchner and her lot. And in 2019, Alberto Fernandez, who was not the strongest presidential candidate ever fielded, won quite easily over Macri's re-election bid for the same reason. So I think, having come to a position where all the mainstream parties have essentially been seen to have failed in government, it's not entirely surprising that someone completely outside the system should emerge, though I think most of us were probably surprised by just how far outside the system this candidate was. Now, I've been asked to talk a little about the social and political overview. I think the social overview is pretty well known and it's pretty obvious. The context here is a poverty rate which was 40% officially at the end of last year. It's certainly higher now. We've got inflation of 142% annually as of October. The economy is in recession. There is a very large debt to the IMF, which is going to be renegotiated. The social and political environment is dreadful. I know Paul will come on to the economic outlook now, but in this context, it's almost more remarkable that there hasn't been a bigger upheaval than there has been before now. And one of the reasons for that, I think, has been in the past, the Peronist movement has always been very effective at containing dissent, partly through welfare and through other mechanisms. There's no longer really the resources to do that, and I think the Peronist movement has lost a lot of strength, both because of its failings and because it was originally based very much on more of a trade union formal employment structure, which no longer exists. So many voters now are kind of outside the system as it is. They're in the informal sector. They don't have the benefit of trade union or other sort of employment-related benefits, and I think they don't see a problem with blowing up the system. So that seems to be what has happened. Now, how long will people be satisfied with the new alternative that they've chosen? Well, I think Milei has both strengths and weaknesses on this front. Among his strengths are the fact that he got a much larger vote than anybody expected. It was more than 11 percentage points more than Massa's vote. So for the moment, he's got a popular mandate which can't really be disputed. And also he got a cross-class vote. It's not only the business class, it's not only the working class, it goes across the country and across class sectors. In fact, Sergio Massa only won the Greater Buenos Aires area by 1.5 percentage points, and that's always been sort of the key constituency for the Kirchners, certainly, and Milei has disputed that very, very successfully with them. I think what this means is that there won't be a lot of immediate pushback by the traditional parties, and that's partly also because the traditional parties are on their knees now. I don't think either of the two main coalitions expected the sort of defeat that they've had, and they are going to have to take some time to regroup. And in that time, they could potentially sort of try to stabilize the government. But he also has a great many weak points. I think he's got no political experience. He has what we might describe as a doubtful temperament from what we've seen of him in the past. I don't think he's someone who is well suited to kind of cross-party negotiations that he's going to need to be involved in. He has very little congressional support. He's only got 39 seats out of 257 in the lower house and 7 of 72 in the Senate. And even if he gets the support of Macri's bloc in Congress, he's still a long way short of a majority. And as I say, this means he is really going to have to negotiate, particularly if he wants to push ahead with the reforms he's promised, like eliminating the central bank and dollarizing the economy, because that would require constitutional reforms, which need a 2/3 majority in Congress, which I can't see how he can ever get. And I think the fundamental problem is that the economic situation is what it is. It hasn't changed as a result of the elections. So he's coming in with no resources. And if he does go through with a lot of the things he's promised, such as cutting welfare subsidies, cutting energy tariff subsidies, cutting public spending radically. There will be pushback against this at the popular level fairly soon. I don't think that his supporters are terribly interested in the ideology behind what he's said or in the actual policies that he's put forward. Frankly, a lot of them wouldn't have voted for him if they had been paying attention to policies he was proposing. But I think from that point of view, he's probably got some room for maneuver in terms of if he doesn't do precisely what he said, people aren't going to be that bothered, but they are going to want to see some results. And if there are no positive results in the fairly near future, then it just looks to me that the social situation could well explode. People are already at a limit, and if things get worse and they don't see any rapid improvement, then we could be looking at a very, very volatile situation quite early in the year. And as I said before, I mean, the Parents movement has been quite good at channeling popular dissatisfaction in the past. That is not the case now. Whether it will be in future is a different question, but the party is going to have to regroup. There will have to be some thinking about the leadership going forward. Will that return to Christina Kirchner? My guess, frankly, is that if Milei really falls apart, then she might be the logical person for a lot of the public to turn back to. Juntos por el Cambio, I think, has been pretty much decimated by Macri's decision to support Milei. The other parties within it are going to split away. So again, we don't really know what the opposition coalition will look like in the fairly near term. But I think before handing over to Jackie, I did hear someone the other day saying that they thought that a lot of Milei's voters may soon suffer from buyer's remorse. And I think that is probably the case.
Thank you, Jill. Sorry, Jill saying fantastic discipline on operating the parameters of time. Slightly catch it. That was a really excellent start because it summed up, I think, both what started to look at what happened and the scale of what happened on Sunday. But I think a lot of the question then going forward will be about governability, both around the temperament of the president-elect and the practicalities. But we can explore those in more and more detail as we go through this session. So, Jill, thank you for starting us off. Right, our next speaker, who is in Argentina, so I believe so, right on the ground where it matters, picking up what's happening, is Dr. Jacqueline Berend, who is a Vice Dean for Academic Affairs at the School of Politics and Government at National University of San Martin. And thank you very much for joining us, and particularly having I'm sitting in London, so it's great to have your perspective from inside Argentina. Over to you, Jacqueline. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. This is a great panel, and I'm very happy to be able to discuss these issues with these colleagues. I'd like to start off by saying that I am very concerned by the victory of Javier Milei. Javier Milei represents a victory of the extreme right in Argentina, and this extreme right has now allied with former President Mauricio Macri's Pro Party, which has split in a way from its former coalition, which was Juntos por el Cambio. And this will provide him with greater governability and knowledge about the workings of the state. But at the same time, Pro is now desperately negotiating with Milei the positions that they will have and that they will receive in exchange for helping Milei win the elections. Now, why am I concerned about Milei's election? And this is what I'm going to try to focus on the idea of, well, issues of governability, issues of, democracy, what it can mean for democracy and for an authoritarian backlash. Milei based his campaign on an anti-system rhetoric in which he accused politicians of being a caste that sought to reproduce its privileges, but he has now allied with the same caste itself. Now, as a candidate, he campaigned with images of destruction, buildings exploding in his last campaign gathering, a chainsaw in hand, basically the idea of destruction, with no clear idea of what kind of reconstruction he had in mind, except, doing away with everything that exists in Argentina with the political system, And as Jill has said, with a lot of policies that I will now go into. One of the main concerns that I have is his vice president. His vice president-elect, Victoria Villarroel, is a lawyer who has defended those who committed human rights violations during the military dictatorship. She has justified these crimes. She comes from a military family, and she will be in charge of defense and security. So this is reason for concern, because in Argentina, we have laws that state that the military can't be in charge of internal security issues. There is a lot of confusion in the newly elected president as to the role of defense forces and internal security forces as well. And then some of Milei's main campaign promises, which he has recently become ambivalent about, include shutting down the central bank, scrapping the peso and adopting the dollar as the national currency, privatization of all state companies, including the YPF oil and gas company, the national airline, public television, public radio, public news agencies, privatization and introduction of fees in state education and public universities and in the health system. Now here there's a problem, because education and health are not federal policies. They are, funded and governed by provincial governors, but public universities are funded by the national government. So this is something real that could happen. Privatization of the National Council for Scientific and Technical Research, which is the one that has, in conjunction with a national university, my university, developed a vaccine against COVID, slashing of state spending, subsidies and social plans, cutting trade with Brazil and China, where most of Argentina's exports go. Now, these are all measures that maybe an extreme right-wing government anywhere in the world could adopt. So why is Milei a danger for democracy, and why does he represent an authoritarian backlash? Well, he has repeatedly expressed his ideas in violent ways, made misogynist comments, expressed that everything needs to be destroyed, rebuilt from scratch. Most of all, there is a danger of an erosion of the democratic consensus regarding human rights violations that was established after the transition to democracy in 1983. He has justified the torture and murder committed by the authoritarian military regime in the 1970s, saying there were merely excesses. He has said anyone should be free to carry a weapon. He has said he aims to introduce the compulsory military service again, which was eliminated in the 1990s, and which would give a lot of power to the military once again. He has said he is in favor of the possibility of buying and selling human organs, and that this would be a market like any other. He is against sexual education at schools and aims to derogate the federal law that makes it compulsory in school curricula. He aims to limit the right to protest and has said that security forces will repress protest. And his vice president aims to give the military and security forces greater power. Now, in the face of all these challenges, there are serious challenges for governability. Some of these Jill has already mentioned. Milei won the presidency with an overwhelming number of votes. He won in all provinces except 3. One of them is the most populous province of Buenos Aires, but none of the 24 provinces are governed by his party. Now, this is important because he will need support from governors in order to implement policy. And he will need to negotiate. He will need to negotiate with governors and with Congress. So in the case of the 24 provinces, he will have the support maybe of the governors from PRO, that are 5, or some of the governors from the UCR Radical Party. There are 5 governors. Some of them have expressed that they will not support Milei, but 1 or 2 will. But there are 9 governors from Unión por la Patria, from the Peronists, that will not support Milei. One of them is the governor of the province of Buenos Aires, who will now probably become the leader of the opposition, Axel Kicillof. And there are 5 provinces governed by provincial parties. Now, obviously, intense negotiations will begin. Governors need support from the president, and the president needs support from the governors. But it is very complicated. And then there is something very important here that we need to note, and it's that voters voted differently at the local level than they did at the federal level. What does this mean? During this year, we had elections for 22 of the 24 governors, the 24 subnational districts in Argentina. Now, in all these provinces, voters voted for one party at the local level, and then in many cases, they voted for a different party for the presidency. So there is a disjuncture there of how voters interpret responsibility. At the local level, they trusted the politicians and the parties they knew. But at the federal level, they voted for a complete outsider. Now, this shows something that hasn't often happened in the past in Argentina. It has to do with the kind of subnational autonomy that we have in the kind of federalism that Argentina has, which is similar to the federalism that Brazil and Mexico and maybe the United States has, but in some cases, it has greater autonomy. So this is going to be a challenge, the relationship with the governors and how policy is implemented there, and what kinds of protest movements can arise. Now, the largest and most populous province, the province of Buenos Aires, which has 17.5 million population, is now governed by the opposition, by Axel Kicillof. And the province of Buenos Aires contains what is called the conurbano, which is the area that surrounds the federal capital, which is where the greatest number of urban poor live in Argentina. And this could eventually be a source of social instability and protest. Now, Milei won over 70% of votes in two other large provinces, Córdoba and Mendoza, and over 60% of votes in Santa Fe. While the Peronist candidate won only in Buenos Aires, Santiago del Estero, and Formosa. So the situation in the Senate is that quorum is 37 seats, and none of the parties have a quorum by itself. Peronism is still the first minority, and with the help of provincial parties that normally ally with Peronism, it will have quorum. It will probably reach 39. So the ruling coalition made of La Libertad Avanza, the president-elect's party, and Juntos por el Cambio will have to negotiate with the Peronists or with provincial parties. The situation in the lower house is similar. In the Senate, you know, the elected president has 10% of seats. In the lower house, he's got 15% of seats, and quorum is 129. And again, Peronism is the first minority. And what remains to be seen is what will happen to Juntos por el Cambio, which was during the previous the current government, the main opposition, because it has fractured. One of the partners, Coalición Cívica, has already announced it has left because of the agreement with Milei. The Radical Party is split. Many of them have said they will not support Milei. Some of them will. So it is unclear to how many votes they will be able to offer for Milei. So the issue is that Milei's vice president is the one who will be in charge of she's a provisional president of the Senate, and she will have to be in charge of forming coalitions and reaching agreements in the Senate. So although Milei will probably have a honeymoon, as many presidents do, it is unclear how he will implement this vast reform agenda that he is proposing, and what kind of support he will have from the governors to implement this agenda, and from the population as a whole. I agree with Jill that many of his voters voted for a dramatic change. These are voters who no one has really paid attention to over the last few years. They are, when a language of rights is spoken by politicians, these are voters who do not have, labor rights. They are independent workers. Many of them are the ones who, just ride their bicycles distributing goods. So they don't have paid holidays. They don't have paid healthcare. They don't have, a lot of the rights that workers on the books have. So they are informal workers. The issue is that they do have a lot of other rights that they're probably not aware of and that they could lose if Milei carries out his agenda. The question is, however, whether Milei will be able to carry out his agenda, because a lot of the reforms he wishes to implement cannot be done by decree, and he will have to construct large majorities in Congress. Many of them don't require a constitutional reform, but they do require majorities in Congress. And these are, in a way, not new policies. We've already seen them. A lot of them were implemented in the 1970s during the dictatorship and in the 1990s during the government of President Carlos Menem. So in that sense, it's not a new agenda. Even though the newly elected president is an outsider, many of the people who are with him are people who come from politics, but from an extreme right-wing agenda that before had not had the kind of electoral backing that it has now received. So I really think that the election results are a source for concern, that a lot of the consensus of what the state is, what the role of the state is in Argentina, what the importance of public services and public goods for the development of the country are. And I think we will have a lot of very complicated negotiations regarding the developmental path that Argentina will take. Argentina is now at a crucial moment where it has to decide, I'm finishing now, what it will do with lithium, for example. And this is going to be one of the issues that will be discussed. Thank you.
Jacqueline, thank you very much. Sorry to sort of slightly butt in at the end, but I'm keen to allow a sort of conversation among the panelists as well as the presentations by the panelists. But thank you very much for that perspective. Right, our third participant is Paul Segal, who is Reader in Economics of Development at the Department of International Development at King's College London. But crucially, Paul is going to talk about the economic aspects of the election contest, or the debate that formed the election contest. And of course, the extremely radical, breathtakingly radical agenda of the president-elect in the economic field. So that's obviously, Jacqueline's talked a lot about social aspects and some of the historical aspects, from Paul focus particularly on this economic agenda, which has attained a lot of attention, including internationally. So, Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be here on this panel. So there's no question Argentina is in big trouble economically. It needs bold solutions. Now, my concern is that what Milei offers is bold, but it's not really a solution. I think it's very important to talk a little bit about how we got here in order to understand where we go. And an important part of that is that Argentina has a long history of inflation, right, including 2 bouts in hyperinflation a little over 30 years ago. Convertibility in the 1990s did bring inflation under control. It was highly successful in the short run in its own terms, but it created a massive recession and unemployment even before it collapsed. And as we know, it ended in a debt crisis. Now, after the debt crisis, inflation increased reasonably steadily under Kirchnerist governments, under Peronist governments, until 2015. It then increased again under Macri's government, 2015 to 19. And after COVID, especially, it basically spiraled out of control. And as we all know, it's now over 140%. Now, this is clearly a long-run failure of all governments over the last 20 years. But I have seen people talk about 20 years of Kirchnerism. So let's not forget that there were 4 years of Macri government in the meantime. That also managed to double the inflation rate. Macri managed to double the inflation rate from around 25% to over 50%. So this is a cross-party consensus of inflation augmentation over the last 20 years. Not only that, but Macri also issued a very large amount of foreign debt, which he defaulted on rapidly, even by Argentine standards. So that under Macri, Argentina's external debt to GDP ratio doubled from about 30% to over 60%. And at the same time, of course, debt service increased massively, and it's now a major burden on public finances. And it's very important to remember that that debt service right now is a major part of the story of the current rise in inflation, because it's a huge burden on the government finances. However, the biggest problem we have right now is inflation inertia, right? It's not just the history; it's sort of the mindset that Argentine society is in, and that's driven by the devaluation inflation cycle, right? So the problem here is that Argentines are very focused on the price of the dollar. When the dollar goes up by 10%, anyone who has price setting power puts up their prices by the same 10%. And that's despite the fact that for most firms, let's remember, a large share of their costs are going to be in pesos, not in dollars. And yet, even though that's the case, they still match their prices to any rise in the price of the dollar. Why do they do this? Why do they do it? Basically, it's an equilibrium. If you know that all your suppliers are going to be matching their prices to the dollar, their peso prices, then you know that all your costs are going to go up by the same prices as the dollar. Wages lag behind. Your wage costs certainly don't increase in line with the dollar in the short run, but even those, we know that workers try to get their wages to follow the dollar in the medium run. And what happens is essentially the dollar has become the price anchor that everyone focuses on. And so whatever happens to the dollar, it feeds through very, very fast to prices and therefore inflation. But what that means is that once you've got the devaluation, you get the immediate inflation, and that then leads to a further devaluation, and that then leads to further inflation, and you get the devaluation inflation spiral. Now, it's very hard to get out of this equilibrium, again, because it is an equilibrium. Now, in theory, you can get out of it by creating some kind of shock to expectations. If you can sort of suddenly make everyone think we're in a completely different economic regime, then it's possible to end inflation without causing a big recession, right? But you need this kind of shock to expectations so that people think that suddenly everything is different. So people will behave differently. Crucially, they need to think that other people are going to behave differently, and then they also will behave differently. Now, this has not been successfully implemented many times in history. Convertibility in the early 1990s was a successful case. It was a big success in the short term. Only in the quite short term, it ran into problems fairly quickly. But so that's clearly got to be what one has to hope for, right? A change in expectations. But it's hard to do. Now, if you can't dramatically change expectations and change what we call the overall regime, then unfortunately, the only way we know of to reduce high inflation is through massive demand destruction. That means a deep recession. It means high unemployment, a lot of human suffering. And what you do to get there, essentially, is just a lot of monetary and fiscal tightening, right? We know how to do that. We know how to bring down inflation through causing a lot of economic pain. Now, if inflation is brought under control, however it's done, once that happens, there is likely to be a short-run growth boost directly in response to that. Okay, now that's going to be a short-run catch-up growth, if you like, simply a reactivation of the economy. So I expect that will happen at some point in the next, well, I don't want to put a time frame on it, but if inflation is brought under control, we will see short-run growth. I would say that there's a very high chance of that. Now, the bigger question, and particularly the question when we're thinking about Millei's policies, is what's going to happen after that short-run reactivation in the longer run. So what's going to be the impact on growth of the policies that Millei says he wants to implement? The biggest question, of course, is about dollarization. Now, I have no idea if you will be able to implement dollarization eventually. There are legal, constitutional problems that we've heard about. The biggest problem he faces right now is that in order to dollarize, you need dollars. And the Argentine government has none, right? It just doesn't have the dollars it needs to cover its obligations or the obligations of the banking sector. Now, if somehow he finds the dollars he needs, and it's, anyone's guess how that might happen, then he could dollarize, right? Let's suppose he does dollarize, but there are two major problems with dollarizing. The first is you lose the possibility to devalue. And the second is that the central bank loses its function as a lender of last resort when you get a banking crisis. Now, as I've just explained, Argentina currently is not capable of a devaluation in real terms anyway, because of this immediate pass through the prices of any increase in the price of the dollar. Okay, so it's not that Argentina would be giving up an important function that it currently has, but in the medium and long run, that possibility to devalue is going to be extremely important, right? Eventually, when the economy does stabilize again, it's going to need the ability to devalue in order to maintain stability. And let's remember, convertibility in the 1990s ended in depression and debt crisis, in large part, because Argentina needed to devalue, and convertibility meant that it couldn't. So we have been through this before in Argentina and in many other countries, right? Now, the other big part of Millei's plan, of course, is to privatize and liberalize everything, cut the state as much as he can. And again, as Jackie said, that's a big part of the 1990s picture as well, although, of course, he's planning something much more radical in this case. So let's make a few quick comparisons just to see what we might expect from these policies. So going back to Argentina in the 1990s, we did get stabilization of inflation. There was growth, but it was fueled by unsustainable debt, and we all know that ended in disaster. And again, before the actual debt crisis, there was very high unemployment, was kind of over 15% for a couple of years, even before the actual debt crisis itself. We need to talk about Ecuador, of course, which is dollarized in 2000. It successfully controlled inflation. What's growth been like over the last 20 years? Well, our benchmark is Argentina. Argentina had very low growth since 2000 of 0.9% per person per capita, per capita per year over the last 20 years. Okay, so Argentina had a very low growth of 0.9%. Dollarized Ecuador achieved 1.2%. Okay, 1.2%. And over the last decade, growth in Ecuador has been zero, I mean, marginally negative, in fact, which is basically just like Argentina. Okay, so dollarization demonstrably did not help Ecuador to grow. And even with the controlled inflation and without the particular problems that Argentina has, Ecuador has not grown any faster than Argentina. Now, another country really worth looking at, but I think is sort of understudied in this particular respect, is Mexico. Why? Because Mexico is surprisingly close to what Milei is trying to implement in Argentina. Mexico has a very small state by international standards. It has liberalized markets, it has liberalized trade, low inflation, low fiscal deficits, and actually deep insertion into global value chains. It's been very successful at joining global value chains, okay? I mean, it's some people have called it the neoliberal poster child, okay? Now, what was Mexico's growth rate since 2000? It was 0.4%, right? Virtually zero, lower than Argentina. Mexico, that did all these policies, successfully implemented all this kind of liberalization, had worse growth than Argentina over the last 20 years. And let's not forget, both Mexico and Ecuador have more than double the poverty rate of Argentina when you use real internationally comparable poverty lines, okay? By the way, it's essential to use those internationally comparable poverty lines. You can't just look at domestic poverty lines because they're measuring different things, okay? Argentina has low poverty by regional standards. Now, if we look at countries that really have grown fast, like the famous Asian tigers, they absolutely did so through a high integration into global markets, but they also had highly active and interventionist states. It's just a myth that they were liberal, non-interventionist states. That's certainly not true. Some of these states, of course, were avowedly communist as well, or they were, you know, very good at doing capitalism, if you like. And also, it's very important to realize that Argentina still has some important strengths compared to other Latin American countries. It has high levels of education, high levels of health, lower poverty, and lower inequality. And all of those features that make life better for Argentines and Argentines really value, they're a direct result of the strength of the public sector and public services. And that's exactly what Milei wants to cut. And that is going to be a very big blow to those real advantages that Argentina retains. So, sort of bringing it to an end, unfortunately, it's quite possible. The only way to bring inflation under control is going to involve a lot of demand destruction. That means a nasty recession with a lot of unemployment. The government's going to implement fiscal and monetary tightening. It seems unlikely they will protect the incomes of the poor at the bottom of the distribution while they do that. So we can expect rising poverty and a lot of human suffering. If and when inflation is brought under control, however it's done, it's likely we'll get a rapid reactivation of the economy and a lot of catch-up growth in the short term. But in the longer term, the kind of radical libertarian strategy that Milei says he wants to pursue, it's never created long-run growth in any country. There are no cases where that's really worked. It should be obvious that cutting trade with China and Brazil is massively anti-growth. But we do know that his plan will undermine the strengths that Argentina does have in public education and in health, and that it's very likely to lead to rising poverty. So from an economic perspective, I think we also have a lot of reasons for pessimism.
Paul, thank you. There's a lot to cover. I mean, I find it very interesting from a British perspective that the forfeiture of monetary sovereignty is a defining issue for the so-called populist right in Britain, and yet is a sort of defining issue in the opposite direction for the so-called populist right in Argentina. But anyway, let's not talk about the exchange rate mechanism now. But I think it's a sort of interesting, different perspective. Right, our final speaker is Professor Francisco Paniza, who is a professor in Latin American and comparative politics in the government department at the LSE. And particular opportunity, because we haven't really covered it, touched upon it with others, to talk about a range of issues, but particularly Argentina's place in its region, you know, Mercosur-Brazil relationship, and then its wider place, you know, joining this expanded BRICS club, attitudes towards China. There's big international dimensions potentially arising from the result on Sunday. So I think it'd be interesting to explore those. But let's go over to you to talk about that and other topics that take your interest.
Typically, I haven't unmuted my microphone. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for inviting me. Before looking at the international repercussion, I would like to make a few remarks about something that is also perhaps my main field of expertise, which is the question of populism. I will start by saying that I agree with Jill that the electoral result of Sunday were probably the biggest earthquake in Argentinian political history since 1948. But I will slightly qualify it by remarking that Milei's electoral victory represents the fourth refundational project in Argentina in the last 40 years. What I mean by refundational, I mean more than just change. All elections are the opposition campaign basically on the ticket of change. I would say that is a refundational project, a project to set up a new political order or economic order predicated in a complete or more or less complete or more or less radical break with a past that is regarded beyond redemption and the source of all the evils in the country. And I would say that since 1980, Argentina has had three, and this is the fourth, refundational project of very, very different political and economic complexion. The first one was, of course, headed by the late President Raúl Alfonsín. This was a political project, and the basis of the project was the setting of a new democratic order in Argentina. The second was an economic project, was the project of Menem in the 1990s that Paul referred. As I said, basically, the economic project was based on ended hyperinflation and implanted a new economic model, broadly speaking, a neoliberal economic model. And the third one was Kirchnerismo in the early 2000s, and it was both a political and economic project, economically defined as creating a kind of new developmental project as an alternative to neoliberalism, and also as a radical changes in the Argentine democratic and political system to create a new realignment of forces based on a new kind of center-left realignment that came to be known as the Kirchnerista project. How this project fared, very briefly, I think by far the most successful of all was Alfonsín's democratic project. And for all its problems, it has many problems. Argentina democracy has proved to be, in the last 40 years, extremely stable and strong. Not perfect, not without problems, not without flaws, but has suffered and overcome incredibly stress tests. To put just an example, in the early 1990s, two American political scientists studied what were the main determinants for countries to remain democratic, to have no democratic breakdowns. And what they find out is that the main sort of indicator where democracy will endure in a country was to have a GDP per capita of over $8,000 at 1990 prices. Right now something like 20 or something like that. And they found that in the last previous 20, 30 years, no country that has GDP per capita of over $8,000 sorry, democracy has breakdown in this country. There was only one exception in the world, and this exception was, of course, Argentina. Now, reverse now and see what happened to the crisis of 2002 and to all that happened. And democracy, Argentine democracy is still, they are much stronger than in many countries in the region. So that was, I think, a significantly successful project. The other two are, well, as Paul mentioned, Menemismo worked until it didn't work anymore, and Paul explained very well why it didn't work. And in a certain way, Kirchnerismo is the same. It worked politically and economically until it didn't work anymore. And I think effectively it stopped working not last Sunday, but well before. And I think that Massa was a dead man walking, politically speaking, in the last election. So what about this sort of fourth refundational project? And that was strongly stressed by Milei in his speech. I would think that trying to look at sort of without passion, without trying to being sort of free of any political bias, I think it's a high risk, high reward project, and it's a very strange project at the same time. Why you think first it is a strange and awkward project? Well, basically because some of Milei's closest advisors have defined it is The project of Milei is to end with populism. And what we mean by populism is difficult to know. That economists tend to mix economic populism and political populism are two different. And the strange thing in this project is that to end populism, they have trust a populist to end project. Populists. As I said, I have worked a long time on populism, and I think Milei ticks a lot of the boxes that define populism. An anti-establishment outsider, check. Divide society between the casta and the people or citizens, check. Highly personalist with direct communication with the people, check. Transgressor, culturally, etc., check. Rupturist, check. All these are characteristics that the literature on populism define as political populism, as it differs from populism. Now, this project that combines sort of fight fire with fire has, I would say, considerable risks. And the risks have been highlighted by many of my antecessors. And they are basically defined that with no organized or institutional strong base of support, he would rely very, very much on support from public opinion. And I would say this support will not be based on ideology in spite of all sorts of right-wing rants. I don't think that most of the people that vote for Milei vote on his ideological postulate, but on the mandate to sort out the economic problem that Argentina is that, and perhaps secondary, the security situation. As Jill and Paul said, Milei have some positives and negatives, some strengths and weakness about that. First, they have the strongly legitimacy of a very, very large popular vote and a clear mandate to address the question. But, and again, now comparing with other right-wing populist leaders elsewhere, he has his social base is less solid and less ideological than those of Trump and Bolsonaro, to whom he has been compared. He also has no control of Congress that Bolsonaro has and Trump have for most of his mandate. He has considerable support maybe in sectors of the business community, but also he has been looked with mistrust by other sectors of the community. So I would say that public support for him initially will be strong, that his voters will be prepared to bear some cost of the project of sorting the economy, but it will be extremely time limited and result oriented. How long this time limit is matter to question, but I would say that would make more likely that he will have to use shock than gradually to try to achieve result in the relatively short term. The problem whether he will get the political support to implement a shock economic problem has been, we can discuss it. Very quickly, what happened in the hypothesis that he gets some kind of short-term success as Paul defined in terms of bringing inflation down quite drastically and having a burst of growth? Well, I think the comparison there, more favorable, more positive, would be with Fujimori in the 1990s, another sort of outsider that sort the economy and got the political reward for that. But I would say Argentina is not Peru, and Fujimori, in spite of his considerable economic and political success initially, has ended up in jail. I'm not predicting that Milei will end up in jail, but saying the problem that he faced. Let me just finish with a question about international alignments. As I said, all the sort of headlines here in London is that of Milei being part of the new international populist extreme right, which with the standard bearer obviously have been Trump and Bolsonaro, but Orban in Hungary and a few others. I would say that, yes, that probably qualifies Bolsonaro part of that community, if you want. But the problem and the problem for him is that whether the extreme right-wing populists have made considerable political advances in many countries and have sort of been quite effective ideologically, it is not in power in any of the countries that are important for Argentina. And basically the countries that are important for Argentina are, in no particular order, the United States, Brazil, and China. These are the three countries. Regarding the United States, I would think the most important question for future President Milei would be in terms of the influence of the United States in the IMF and in terms of reaching a deal with the IMF. I don't think that Biden would be or is very fond of Bolsonaro, but I don't think the United States will block a deal with IMF just because Biden doesn't like Milei. And if they reach an agreement, I think the United States will not block it, and in a way, the stability political in Argentina is important for Biden. Brazil is the most problematic for that because of the difference between Lula and Milei. But I think, again, you don't have to look at that ideology. You have to look more. The most important relation, of course, is based on Mercosur. And I think there the chance would be for more stasis and paralysis in Mercosur. There are a couple of alternatives there. One would be the flexibility. That's one. One would be what President Lacalle in Uruguay has been trying to get for many times, the so-called flexibilization of Mercosur. That is basically, we stay in Mercosur, but the country can reach out a free trade agreement with other countries. I don't think that Brazil will stand to that. And the other would be to leave Mercosur altogether. As far as I know, this is not part of Milei's radical plan. So I think the situation will be manage the continuous paralysis and status quo. And for finish with China, I think, again, a project that is based on attractive foreign investment, China would be potentially a major source of foreign investment in Argentina. And I think that China would be quite pragmatic, and probably Milei as well. So this is my take on what's going to happen.
Francisco, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, we're going to finish at about 15:15 because I think it's important to have some discipline on time for people who have listened to us but have other things to get on with in their days. I'm going to try and sort of group a few big issues. Not everybody needs to answer everything, but there are about 3 or 4 big groupings, I think, that come out of that, and for some of the questions we've had. And I'd be interested in what the panel says. So the first issue 1, governability. I think that's partly about the temperament of Milei. I think Jill and others have touched upon this. He's clearly quite a sort of volatile man. Always a bad thing in politics, but he looks perhaps more suited to campaigning than he does to governing by temperament. Others may agree with that or not. But more than temperament, I think more interesting is about the mechanics of governing. You can see this 2 ways, seems to me. The criticism has been made by some of our panelists and by some of our contributors, also Andrew Nixon and a lot of them, that what will Milei be essentially an authoritarian figure who tries to railroad policies through that are opposed by people at regional level, elected people at regional level, or within national parliament. In other words, is he a threat to the constitutional democratic integrity of Argentina? Or the other way, he has this extraordinary mandate to deliver radical change. He hasn't pretended to be something he's not. He's just won an election for people who clearly have a great appetite for radical change. And what will happen if his ability to deliver that is thwarted by people within the system, whether they're elected or unelected? And there's a sense that even if you vote for something different, you still get the same, and therefore your vote is of no consequence. So I can see potential governability problems in both directions. Maybe if you're anti-Milei, you're worried about his authoritarian tendencies, if they exist. If you're pro-Milei or pro, radical change agenda in Argentina, you're worried that there's an inbuilt inertia which makes change fundamentally difficult, if not impossible, to deliver, even if you have a big electoral mandate. To talk about governability, because some people say this is all going to blow up. You know, this is going to be a sort of 6-month firework display, and then it's all going to explode. Maybe, maybe not. I mean, any of the panelists, you know, jump in, maybe particularly Jill and Jacqueline, who went first and second and haven't spoken for a while. Any rapid thoughts? Because let's move on. But governability.
Okay. Can I just throw in a couple of rapid thoughts?
Yep.
Milei's voters expressed a desire for radical change, but I'm not sure how deep that is or how long it's going to last once they start to see what the implications of radical change might be. As I said earlier, I think he's got a real problem, which is how you get through the first few months without, as Paul said, basically destroying what's left of demand. And demand destruction has been pretty great since the pandemic already. I'm not sure how much room for maneuver he's got on that. If the implications of radical change economically are as adverse for most people as we all seem to think, then he's going to lose that popular base quite quickly. And if he does, he really has no ability to try to go over the head of Congress and try to bring out his supporters. I think his support may diminish very quickly, as several of us have said. It's more absolute anger and frustration over the current situation than it is any real ideological affinity with what he may or may not represent.
Well, isn't there then a sort of catch-22 that people are so disillusioned with the status quo that they vote for a very radical change? You're then saying that people will be so disillusioned with the radical change that his voters will desert him in favor of what? A return to the status quo that they've just voted against. I mean, what ultimately is the route out of this?
This is the problem, because I don't think, to be honest, I don't think Milei was the route out of it, but people felt that there was no alternative. I don't think that there's any appetite really for going back to the authoritarian road. Support for democracy and rejection of authoritarianism in Argentina has remained quite high, in spite of which 7% of the voters voted for Milei on Sunday. But I think that's where we run into the same wall. We've run into it before in 2001 with Que se vayan todos. I mean, this is what we keep coming back to, but in the end, you know, the entire political class can't just go. Something has to.
Thank you. Very, very quickly, like maybe, 30 seconds to a minute each. Jacqueline, Paul, Francisco, in that order, governability, and then let's move on to another one. Jacqueline.
Okay, thank you. Regarding governability, I think it's very important to remember that Argentina is a federal country, so with substantial subnational autonomy. So any governability needs to be backed by the governors and by Congress. So this is going to require a lot of skills that I think, Jeremy, you just mentioned. Milei will have to show that he is able to negotiate, and he hasn't shown those skills yet. But I think this is where Macri comes in, trying to help him negotiate with other sectors of society. The question is whether that will be enough, because Macri doesn't command so many legislators or governors. And as you know, right now, today, the news is a big part of Macri's party and coalition of former associates have not supported his move to back Milei. So there will be a great deal of negotiation to ensure governability. Now, nobody wants things to blow up in Argentina. I mean, I think this is fairly clear, because when things blow up, those who are more seriously damaged and hurt are the poorer and more vulnerable citizens. So I think that the question is, following what Jill said, is really to what extent, if Milei doesn't have some results that improve the lives of the voters that trusted him and voted for change, how long this support will last. And we'll see it in 2 years' time with the midterm elections.
Yeah. If not a lot sooner in the opinion polls. Paul, over to you.
I just wanted to sort of remind people that there's the fact that he has a strong mandate in the sense of a high percentage in the final count doesn't mean he has a strong mandate for any of his particular policies, right? A lot of them are actually very unpopular policies. So I don't think that's going to be a reason why people will go along with him particularly. Sure, there'll be a honeymoon, but it's not that people will want him to implement a lot of things that are highly unpopular. Secondly, both Jill and Francisco have said that this is the biggest shock to Argentine politics since the 1940s. And actually, we are all shocked. That's certainly true. But I do think that's an exaggeration. Let's not forget, Argentina had 4 military coups from the 1950s onwards, right? Now, this is not nearly as bad as a military coup. I mean, we have to get a bit of historical perspective here as well. This has been completely constitutional. It's a popular vote, and there are really strong checks and balances, which is exactly what you're talking about. There are strong checks and balances against his more extreme instincts, and maybe he'll want to try to seize more power, who knows, but I don't think we should assume that that is going to happen.
Thank you. Very good, succinct. Francisco, you wanted to say a bit on governability.
Yeah, a couple of minutes. First, I agree with our panelists about the strong checks and balances against any authoritarian tendency from Milei. But I would say the following. Some time ago, an Argentinian political scientist, Andres Malamud, wrote a brilliant article saying that in Latin America, it's easy to win elections are very difficult to govern. That is easy to win election is a case in point, somebody that in few months come from nowhere to win an election. Why is difficult to govern? Well, the main reason for that throughout Latin America, many presidents don't have a majority in Congress. And when you don't have a majority in Congress, you are in all kinds of problems, not only to pass legislation, but also to keep your position. And in many of these cases, and again, I'm not saying that this will necessarily be the case of in Argentina, presidents that have no majority in Congress haven't impeached throughout Latin America. So even if he makes an agreement with Macri and he will not have a majority in Congress, I think it would be very, very difficult for Milei to have governability.
Thank you. Okay, my second response is very good to wrap through to economic side. I mean, I was tempted to say, do you think in 2 years' time that Argentina will have its own currency and a central bank? Yes or no? Well, you can try that one if you like. But are those two headline policies real policies, or are they the sort of rhetorical flourishes that may be, dismantled, but there will still be a pretty radical economic agenda, particularly around cutting the size of the state, cutting the size of government departments and other sort of more symbolic acts, as well as welfare payments. I just give a sense of what is the real, in inverted commas, Milei, and where will Argentina, assuming it doesn't blow up, where will Argentina be in 2 or 3 years' time in terms of what its economic policy or sort of outlook looks like? Don't have to contribute, but and again, maybe a minute or so. But Jacqueline, you go first.
Okay, well, I think any dollarization or scrapping of the central bank will require majorities in Congress. So I think even though Milei, is really proposing this and really believes in this, he will he will have to come to terms with the reality that in Argentina's institutional democracy, he requires majorities in Congress for this. And I don't think he's going to get the majorities to scrap the central bank or to dollarize the economy. Now, if, again, in a comparative intent, if we look at the 1990s, when Argentina's currency was pegged to the dollar, Menem, who implemented this, not only had a lot of consensus in his election as president, he had a majority in Congress, both in the Senate and in the lower house. Now, Milei is very far from this. So Menem could implement a lot of his radical policies, including privatization, because he had this support in Congress. So I really do think it's quite difficult to do this.
Thank you. Paul?
So I defer to Shaki on the politics of it. That sounds very plausible to me. Economically, as I mentioned, dollarization is impossible without dollars. It's very hard to see how he's going to get his hands on whatever it is, $40–50 billion that he needs to dollarize. Who's going to lend to Argentina, which is in massive debt distress already. So that seems unlikely. What kind of cuts he can get through? Again, I defer to Shaki on the politics of it. I'm confident he won't be able to get through all the cuts he would like to get through. But, you know, Macri is on a similar page to him in terms of cutting spending more generally, cutting social spending especially. A lot of people on the, you know, center-right and further in Argentina think that Argentina spends too much on public services and on poverty reduction. And I strongly expect they will be able to cut those a significant amount, and that will lead to rising poverty. So that for me is a likely outcome.
Is it plausible that basically the sort of monetary radicalism falls by the wayside, but the fiscal radicalism survives to some extent? There probably is some public appetite for some fairly tough medicine.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. And to be fair, if Massa had won, he would have had to do a major fiscal adjustment as well. There would have been major cuts coming down the line from anyone who won, because there's kind of no alternative at this point.
Living beyond your means. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. No, I wouldn't say it's living beyond your means. I really think that's the wrong way to think about it. There's a lot. I mean, the problem is they're in a bad equilibrium, and it will take a big shock to move them out of the bad equilibrium.
Okay, good point. Right, let's go on. Let's try international relations. There's lots here, but Milei is breathtakingly uncomplimentary about some other leaders of countries that he doesn't see eye to eye with, by conventional standards anyway. Clearly, the relationship with Brazil is a very important relationship with Argentina. We should explore that. Mercosur, which has been seen as a sort of agent potentially for more free trade. Milei seems pro-free trade, but anti-Mercosur. Relationship with Biden, relationship with Trump, were he to become president in a year's time or so. And then BRICS, a very interesting play of Argentina. Let me put it this way, you know, does Milei represent a Western orientation version for Argentina and a rejection of a BRIC global South, more Chinese-led orientation of Argentina? Is that too crude? Or even if the public don't see it that way, does Milei himself see it that way? Quite a lot of his supporters seem to see it that way. So where does this, you know, it's a big geopolitical, ideological question. Where does this leave Argentina in the world? Who is its friends and who is it antagonizing as a result of this vote on Sunday? Any takers for the sort of Jill? Very good.
Yeah, yeah, I guess just a few points on that. I mean, as has been pointed out, China and Brazil are key trading partners for Argentina. China has also been the only source of significant investment and indeed lending. The currency swap deal has been used to keep rolling over debt repayments to the IMF. In practical terms, there's not any real way that you can break off relations with Brazil and China. I think Macri found this himself. Macri wanted to reduce the economic relationship with China and to review all the contracts that had been made during the Kirchner governments, and he ended up going to Beijing cap in hand looking for money. There isn't a clear, obvious source if you get rid of China, and there's also there's no market for Argentine soya if it doesn't go to China because it's all genetically modified and there are very few markets for that. So, you know, in practical terms, this isn't doable, and I think he's got enough people around him who will be aware of that, because it would be very, very bad for the agri sector, for the business community more widely. And as somebody pointed out, you need infrastructure investment very badly. And if it doesn't come from China, then it's hard to see where it is going to come from. You know, in terms of more widely, he has sort of muttered about coming out of Mercosur. I don't actually think what Milei does or doesn't do with Mercosur is going to have a lot to do with the Mercosur-EU trade deal. I've never been very confident that that's ever going to go through. There's enough pushback within Brazil and also within the EU that I think it's just going to continue to stagnate regardless of who is in government in Argentina. And I noticed there's a comment there about whether Milei will have tense relations with the UK over the Falklands. I mean, in actual fact, he did cause some controversy during the campaign by saying that the Falkland Islanders had the right to choose Therefore, that doesn't sound to me like someone who is planning to invade the islands at any moment. And I think realistically, even for somebody who is temperamentally somewhat volatile, I think any incoming president in Argentina has so many problems that are so much worse than the UK relationship, and the question of sovereignty over the islands, it doesn't register.
Thank you, John. Let me finish on, because we've got 5 minutes. It's two development points from this sort of international point. One is, we're sitting here in London. Any thoughts on the Argentina-UK relationship? Clearly, it's not as important as the Argentina-Brazil relationship or the US or China, but nevertheless, there is it has potential significance, and I'm speaking to you from Britain. And if you don't want to do the British angle, I'm interested in what this says about Latin American politics. For me, I thought it was extraordinary, this lining up of former presidents behind candidates. In a European context, the idea that you'd have former German chancellors taking sides in a French presidential election and the British Prime Minister, supporting one, and you've got this tweeting. You've got the Colombian president tweeting how unhappy he is about Milei winning, and then you've got the president of El Salvador criticizing the Colombian president being. There is, I think this goes beyond Argentina, I suppose, the point. So this is about a sort of cleavage through Latin American politics, and people really showing their colours and not feeling any inhibitions about basically sticking their oar into the sovereign, independent policy-making decision of another country. So I'm interested. We've got So why don't we go around everybody, either do the British dimension or the Latin American schism, as I put it a bit dramatically, or any concluding thoughts, and we'll all try and sort of wrap in a minute or so each. Francisco, why don't you start?
Yeah, very briefly about the British relation. A free trader like Milei would be a gift for the Brexiteers from the current government, because Brexit was predicated on the idea that Britain will have free trade relations with all other countries in the world. The problem there are two problems. The first one is the straitjacket of Mercosur. That would be very difficult for Milei to have a unilateral free trade agreement with Britain. And second, the question of the Falkland Malvinas, where it's not in the interest of Milei to consider anything there in order to strengthen his bases. In terms of the rest of Latin America, we tend to think in Latin America in terms of waves. We have this sort of big wave of the early 2000s, and then a return of the right, etc. What we have now is extreme fragmentation in the region with no sort of clear political alignments. But I think within this context, Milei has very few natural allies in the region. We think about the big countries, Mexico and Brazil, of course, but also with Chile, with Colombia has very, very few natural allies. Things may change, particularly the victory of Trump in the United States next year will be important for Milei, at least symbolically. In Brazil, we're still quite far away from election, and it's quite unlikely that Bolsonaro will be allowed to run for election, so there the change will be there. So I don't see that Milei can align with a clear block of like-minded presidents in Latin America with enough weight to make a significant impact in the regional panorama.
Francisco, thank you very much. Jacqueline.
I don't really think relations with the UK will change. I think Milei said a lot of things in campaign, but I don't think we'll see any important changes there. With regard as to why Latin American presidents speak openly about their preferences regarding other countries in the region, I think it mainly has to do with the idea of trying to come up of how Latin America presents itself to the rest of the world and trying to negotiate jointly with other countries, for example, the United States or with Europe. I mean, they don't. Sometimes they succeed, sometimes they don't. But I think these opinions about what's going on in other internal processes have to do with that. Now, I just wanted to conclude with something very short regarding the economics, what we were saying before, and something that Paul said. In some cases, I think Milei is not, he won't need to make dramatic cuts. What he just, in a context of inflation, if you simply don't raise salaries for civil servants, for teachers, for universities, etc., it's equivalent to a budget cut. So I think that's what he's basically going to do. It doesn't need to be announced. It doesn't need to be negotiated.
Close a few government departments. Do some symbolic things, I suppose. Paul, sorry, I say that casually, but you understand the point I'm making it in sort of macro terms, but it would send a message. Paul and Jill, any concluding thoughts on anything?
I just wanted to come back briefly to your comment about the politics of monetary sovereignty, which I thought was interesting. That I think the big difference is that in Argentina, like in all of Latin America, it's always been the case that a large section of the elites in those countries very much see their interests aligned with the major international foreign powers. That's where they've done business. And so that kind of, the UK hasn't been one of those major powers for quite a long time, although we did used to be in the distant past. But now I think that's why, a lot of elites in Argentina in particular see the US as, if you like, on their side. And that makes them feel quite favorable towards the dollar. And that's a very different kind of underlying political sentiment, if you like, from something like, how British people feel about the pound.
I get drawn in about whether Southern European lack of faith in their ability to exercise monetary sovereignty makes them more attached to the euro. But this is for another day. Jill, do you have any concluding thoughts?
I guess just briefly, it's a more general point, but I agree there's not going to be any major change in the relationship with the UK, because I think one thing this election has demonstrated is that most of the people who voted for Milei are worried about the here and now. They're not really worried about the Falklands conflict 40 years ago. They're not worried about what happened before a lot of them were born. They're worried about what is going to happen now. So I think he has very little to gain by going back on that issue one way or another.
Well, thank you. I'm very sorry to everyone who's watched this, because there are lots of subjects that we also have covered. Poverty rates, domestic social program, which clearly has few sort of macro implications, but provokes very strong reactions among millions of Argentinians. What it means for the opposition or the centre left or personalism, how they sort of extract themselves from this really catastrophic result last Sunday at the presidential level. We didn't have time for those, but we covered a lot, and we covered it in time, fractionally overrunning. And we're going to have to revisit this subject, because I think it's fascinating, and it's really only in the first sort of chapter of a big saga that is unpredictable in terms of how it will roll out. So thank you everyone for watching. I hope you found it interesting and informative. Stay in touch with Canning House. We are trying to do lots of things, lots of different areas that are similarly intellectually stimulating. And thank you very much to the four panelists: Jill Hedges, Jacqueline Perrin, Jorge Gal, and Francisco Panizza. Really good, really informative. Very grateful to all of you for giving up your time for Canning House. Hope to see you all in a similar discussion sometime soon.